it's probably almost 30 years ago now that Bob Lyon first came to Calgary to teach us about barbecue. And that's really the germ. That's the actual spark.
Wow.
That's the spark of barbecue culture in Alberta and maybe even Western Canada.
Hi, I'm Barbecue Brian from the House of Q, and on the screen here is something really special. I'm at my home here in North Okanagan, and beside me here is, at his home, is my brother Glenn. I call him Brother Glenn, barbecue terminology. One of the original founders of House of Q, and the other personality on the screen is Rockin Ronnie Shewchuk, which I also know is the rest of that phrases and the Butt Shredders, which is his barbecue team name. But those are the three faces on the screen. And Glenn, if you could share with us the connection between the three of us here.
So, Ron, it was 2004, Eat Vancouver Food Show, and you and your lovely daughter Zoe were doing a demo inside. And Brian and I and our respective wives were at the show. And also along with us was my, at that time, infant son. And I had been, I was doing the daddy thing and I was trying to keep him asleep. So I left the other three of them and I wandered around, and I think I wandered by your stage right about when you were getting ready to start a demo. And months prior, Brian had sort of started talking to me about Southern style barbecue, and I, good Canadian kid, didn't know anything about it. And I thought, hey, this guy's going to do something like that. I better hang around. And I did laps at the back while you and Zoe were getting some pork butts on. And after the and then at the end you did some tastings, and I jumped into the end of the line and got a couple nibbles at the end. And I was like, oh my God. I can't believe this. And Brian and I had been cooking together, not barbecue, but cooking together for quite a few years. And it was like, okay, here's a new challenge here. And after I tasted this, I went and got Brian and the girls, and I said, okay, you guys, we got to come back. And you and Zoe, I think, were just tidying up, and we kind of caught you backstage, or caught you side stage, and started talking. And I distinctly remember that was sort of a spark of our adventures in the world of competitive barbecue.
That's true. I remember it really well.
I suspect you probably.
Well, there were these
I suspect
young.
You probably influenced a bunch of other people as well.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that I have. But you guys are maybe one of the best examples of people being inspired, not by me, but by tasting real barbecue for the first time. Because for that show, I think if I remember right, I was promoting my book, which hadn't quite come out at the time. And we were handing out samples at that food show. That's right. And I was trying to promote the whole concept of cooking Southern style barbecue at home. Thanks, guys. And oh God, if you guys can relate to this, there were 3 days, I think 3 or 4 days to the home show. I would work all day in the booth, then come home, put 4 pork butts on, prep and put 4 pork butts on. And then in the morning, just before the show, I'd wrap them up in foil, put them in a cooler, and bring them to the show. And it was like 12, 14-hour days. But then they'd rest in the cooler until I started sampling them. But that barbecue, that pork was just at its prime. So when you guys had a bite, when you have a bite of real barbecue and you've never had it before, it changes your life. And it blew your minds, and you asked me about, did you ask me at the time? I think you did. You said, we're thinking of maybe forming a team of our own. And I said, just go for it, right?
Absolutely. So, Ron, neither Glenn nor I were A, doing barbecue, and B, competitive cooking was not even an idea, at least I can say in my mind.
Yeah.
And so that was very clearly exactly what you said, is just go buy a cooker and start cooking. You'll never
Yeah.
know what will happen until you try it.
Yeah, I think I told you guys to get a Weber Smoky Mountain cooker,
Yep.
and the rest is history, because you, among a handful of, well, not just a handful, among many others, went on to have, both of you guys have barbecue careers that go well beyond my own. I mean, it's really gratifying to see. And then, I remember the first time you guys competed in Whistler against the Butt Shredders. Back then, my team was sort of the team to beat, I think. And I remember we had what we used to call the Rockin Ronnie suite, or the Butt Shredders suite, at the hotel where the contest was. And I invited you guys over for dinner I think that on the first night of the contest. And you're sort of like all wide-eyed and, wow, this is so cool. And then, of course, over time, you made barbecue history of your own, which is super cool. It's and I know that, Brian, you wanted me to go back a little bit to the roots of barbecue in Western Canada, right?
So Ron, if you could, going just that era right before when Glenn and I got into barbecue, and kind of your story, it has a key influence on the Canadian barbecue space, but it's the Pacific Northwest. And who are the people there? And I know Bob Lyon is a key individual that's that's from
right.
Your story. But share with me kind of some of the people that were there and some of the events just prior to those early days of Rockin Ronnie and the Butt Shredders.
Sure. Well, it's a great story, actually, because there was a guy who was a fireman named David Viljasic. And David was, firemen, of course, they have a lot of time off between shifts, and often they're really great cooks. And David was a fantastic chili cook. There, the fire chef, absolutely. They called David the fire chef, and what he did, he loved to cook chili, and he would go down to the US and cook chili in competitions. And he had made a whole bunch of friends down there. He also happened to have a rolling barbecue pit, and he would cook barbecue as well. And a lot of the chili contests back then were accompanied with a barbecue contest too. And so, as an excuse to bring all his American chili cooking and barbecue friends up to Canada, David founded the Canadian Barbecue and Chili Festival a long time ago. I think maybe 30 years ago or more.
That sounds about right.
And that was an excuse for David to bring his friends up, and it became this, but again, almost all the teams were American, and there was the odd Canadian one, and we really didn't know how to cook barbecue that well at the time. A few years after David founded the Canadian Barbecue Contest and Chili Cook-Off, which was in New Westminster for many years, a couple of people named Sandy and Carol Dougal were organizing this thing called Festival on the Bow. And it was a kind of music, food festival. It was always held on the Labor Day weekend. And Carol and Carol and Sandy Dougal wanted to bring a barbecue contest to their festival, and they engaged David to come and advise them and help them kind of set it up and make the connection with the Kansas City Barbecue Society and so on. And one of the things, so they held the contest for 1 or 2 years, and they had the same problem, is that they didn't attract any Canadian cooks, because Canadian cooks, backyard cooks, didn't know anything about Southern style barbecue.
So pause there for a second, Ron, because even so, I'm guessing 97-ish.
This would have been back in the first contests that we. I think it would have been even before then. Barbecue on the Bow has been going for almost 30 years now. What is it, about 30 years ago?
So that's 1990.
Yeah, somewhere in the early 90s anyway.
So somewhere in the early 90s. And why I wanted to pause there is that even when Glenn and I started into this crazy game, this crazy world in 2004, 2005, you had to search high and low for even barbecue gear. It didn't even exist in Canada. You
Yeah.
had to do it in mail order or go in the States and go buy it and bring it into Canada.
Well, and
So there was even another.
try to buy a decent pork shoulder back then, or
They
you
didn't.
couldn't find a brisket.
So it's not like the cows didn't have a brisket, but it's just trying to get them and even to get this gear. And so just to explain the scenario of what's going on there. But okay, so this event is starting in Calgary, and you were living in Calgary at the time.
That's right. I was working in the oil patch, and I was living in Calgary, and I'd bought this smoker, or I had an electric smoker, one of the kind that hunters, and anglers use. And a friend of mine had gone down to Texas and to San Antonio for a wedding where he had a bunch of relatives, and all they talked about is barbecue. And he bought at a Costco down there. He bought a really cheap water smoker, brought it up, and he and I would cook everything. We were smoking food aficionados, and we would do salmon and sausages and game and so on, and we loved it, but we didn't really associate that with Southern style barbecue. And then, because we were sort of connected into the food scene, my wife was a reporter at the Calgary Herald, and she knew Kathy Richardier, who most people in Calgary know her as the longtime restaurant critic, and Kathy was connected into the food scene, and Sandy and Carol brought this guy named Bob Lyon, who was one of David's best friends, who was this great barbecue cook from Washington State. And they brought Bob up to teach an all-day barbecue workshop in Calgary to basically try to recruit Canadian teams. Say, hey, we've got this contest. We've got this expert in from the States, and they rented a classroom in a local high school, and they begged, borrowed, and stole a bunch of charcoal grills. And for this glorious day, there were about 12 of us. So, I joke about this. Is like we became the apostles of barbecue for Western Canada after that, because we were all inspired by Bob, because we cooked ribs and chicken and brisket, and he brought some brisket for us to taste, and we were just absolutely blown away by the flavors and excited at the whole idea of competitions. And from those 12 people, about 4 or 5 teams were formed, including ours. And then later that year, this was in the summer of that year, we competed in our first barbecue on the Bow. And I think we got a consolation prize as best new cooks or something like that. But we were hooked. We were hooked. They held it on Prince's Island Park, and the whole idea of being up all night in a public park where it would be totally illegal to do something like that unless we were actually part of a festival. But we get to cook meat, sip libations, play music in the beautiful park all night, and the next morning, bleary-eyed, wake up and compete in the contest. And then the following year, we came first place in pork shoulder, which was a huge thrill. And we kind of progressed for 7 years. We competed in barbecue on the Bow and kept getting better and better, but never won. And then I moved to the West Coast and wanted to keep doing competitive barbecue. And we were in the 2000, we competed in the Canadian Championships and came second. By a hair too, like really close, almost won the thing. So we were just excited. So we had to compete. And then the following year, David got sick, and unfortunately, and the barbecue contest got canceled. And so we still wanted to compete that year. So we went down to the Oregon State Open Barbecue Championship, and we were the only Canadians there. We showed up about 10 at night, kind of scrambled because it's a 9-hour drive. We scrambled to get our gear together. I think we got our brisket on. I think we cooked 2 briskets. We got it on about midnight, which was way too late for brisket. And in the middle of the night, one of our smokers went out because we weren't paying enough attention. And I inadvertently did the Texas cheat, where we were scrambling to get this brisket cooked, and I wrapped it in foil just instinctively, put it over a high heat. Anyway, the story is that, unbelievably, against some of the best teams in the Pacific Northwest, we came first place in chicken, pork shoulder, and brisket, and we won the whole contest. And it was like people were, it was crazy because no Canadians had ever won a barbecue contest in the States before. And that was the start of our barbecue career. I remember when I called up my wife
After winning.
after we won that contest, and I said, honey, get yourself a new pair of shoes because we're going to Kansas City.
That's funny. That's awesome.
Of course, she wanted nothing to do with going down to Kansas City, but we went down there and competed in the American Royal, and we went on to the Jack Daniels, and that was really the start of our quite a long barbecue career.
So, Ron, in Oregon, can you remember any of the teams or people that you met at that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one that stood out in my mind and what I wrote about in the book was a guy called the Dakota Kid. This guy was this old shambling guy, and he'd won a few contests. He famously, I think he got straight tens or something like that for his at the Memphis in May or something one time. And he was at the end of his barbecue career, and he sort of had a limp and he was sort of shambling around. And when he was in Canada one time, I remember just complaining about how you couldn't get a decent pork butt or a set of ribs in Canada because they were just too lean. And I went around and I was so proud of my pork shoulder that morning of the contest. Oh, okay. So there was him. Then there was it Judy Anderson? There were two.
Yeah.
There was a woman and her mother, Judy Anderson and her
Lynn Brokaw.
Lynn Brokaw was big.
Well, there's Mad Mama and the kids. Was that Judy Anderson?
That's it.
Right.
Yeah. And so all those teams were there, and we beat them all. And it was fat. And you know, I brought that morning, I was so proud of my pork shoulder. I brought it around to the other teams to sample it, and thinking that like I'm some hot shot. Their barbecue is, I'm sure, just as good. But anyway, I asked the Dakota Kid if he thought it was any good. And he said, son, this is good barbecue. There's a lot of great teams here today, but I wish you the best of luck. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and I think he unwittingly blessed me. I think some of the power of the Dakota Kid came through into my soul that day, and we won the contest. It was fantastic. And that went, of course, because of that, we got invited to the American Royal. We got invited to the Jack Daniels. We were the first Canadian ever to qualify for the Jack Daniels, because before that they brought in teams, a couple of teams from Ontario who were well-known barbecue aficionados but had never won a contest themselves. And so it was kind of like not quite a pity invitation, but it was like, well, we want to have international content, so we'll invite a couple of these Ontario teams who were very popular with the fans up there. But the Butt Shredders were the first team to actually earn an invitation.
Because of Oregon.
Because of the Oregon State Open, and then because of the Canadian National Barbecue Championship, which we won the following year.
Got it.
So it was a great run.
You know what, Ron, your story about the Dakota Kid is absolutely perfect, because I think Glenn and we share that same receiving of that story and that message from you.
Oh, I put my hand on your shoulder. I said, kid,
just go out and do it. Well, yeah,
I did.
Now listen, I need to change gears on you, Ron, and it's kind of hopefully a surprise for you. There is kind of a subplot to why I did this gathering today. So right. I'm glad you're sitting, and hopefully you're ready for this. So listen, a couple of months ago, I got a notification from the Pacific Northwest Barbecue Association, and they were asking for people who somebody they wanted to bring forward that was influential for them and carried on the spirit, the charisma, if you will, the energy that needs to be in the barbecue community. And I wrote a lengthy email, and I nominated Mr. Ron Shewchuk to be an inductee into the 2020 class of the Pacific Northwest Hall of Fame. And this week, Ron, I received a message from the president of the Pacific Northwest Barbecue Association. And Mr. Shewchuk, it's my pleasure to not only nominate you, but also to announce to you that you are the 2020 inductee into the Hall of Fame for the Pacific Northwest Barbecue Association.
That is absolutely crazy. That I'm really like, I got goosebumps. I'm what an honor. What a lovely thing for you to do, Brian, to vouch for me like that. But wow, it's lucky I saved my old hat, because they can put, you know, when they put the diorama together in the Barbecue Hall of Fame, they're gonna have my old green canvas hat, and I've got a couple other people's paraphernalia, perhaps some scribbled notes from my journal that they can put together the display.
I know the hat because I can picture this hat, and I think you drove over it a few times.
Well, that really just, I'm speechless. You know, that the Pacific Northwest Barbecue Association is a great organization, and the reason that we went to the Oregon Open in the first place is because Bob Lyon told us to join the PNWA and PNWBA, and I did, and I got their flyers in the mail, because they'd send out flyers soliciting people to enter these contests. And I still remember the green piece of photocopied paper that came in the mail with the ad for the Oregon Open, and filling out the form and sending it in. And that really was the start of my true barbecue career, and it led to 3 cookbooks and led to cooking classes and everything like that. So and back then I think Bob was the president of the association, and it's been a great place. I mean, I'm reminded of Carol James, who was the president of that association. It's really a wonderful group of people, and cooking with those guys was fantastic. You know, I'm kind of past competition in my barbecue career, but it really is a great community, and I'm proud to have been a part of it. Wow.
Congratulations, Ron. If we were traveling and able to get into the United States, they would have invited you down to the annual meeting.
That's too bad. But it still doesn't take away from the honor at all. It'd just be fun to celebrate it with those guys.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, I'm trying to think about stories about the PNWBA. You remember the Doughboys?
I don't know that name.
There was a team called the Doughboys that was a couple of brothers. And one of them tragically died. I think he had a heart attack or something. But these guys, they won the Canadian BBQ Championships that year, where we came second. And at the following year, at the PNWBA's annual meeting, where people come down and you have bragging rights and people eat some barbecue and tell stories, they told the story of the Doughboys trying to get to the American Royal. And they bought this, they had a trailer, you know, their barbecue trailer, and their truck broke down about a third of the way in, and they bought a Cadillac from a used car dealer that had a trailer hitch on it. It broke down about 2/3 of the way there, and they told this odyssey of this story of trying to repair their car and ending up being stranded at the end, several hundred miles away from Kansas City, and basically cooking all their barbecue stuff that they had for the competition for the people in their campground. Everybody in the whole campground got competition barbecue. There were some real tales. I mean, we had a lot of fun. And there was that dentist who was
Yeah,
he and his wife.
a doc.
Yeah, he and his wife cooked fantastic barbecue. There were a lot of characters. It was really something.
Ron, it's awesome to be able to celebrate that with you.
Well, I'm just thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm flabbergasted and truly honored. And obviously, when COVID finally gets out of our midst and we can, really celebrate this, I want to go down there and maybe I can be like, they can have the kind of like the previous year's inductee sort of shuffled onto the stage for a couple minutes in next year's event or something.
Maybe so. Maybe so. That's awesome.
Wow.
I'm sure that could be arranged.
So thank you very much. I was glad to share this with you. I hope that people get to hear some of the history of the Pacific Northwest Barbecue Association and how things have transposed over the years from basically nothing to where there is a community north of the border, and not just here on the Pacific Northwest, but across Canada, and how we're able to develop not only friendships, but a hobby, hopefully something better to eat. But there's a lot here as we celebrate.
There is a lot, and I'd like to kind of try to return the compliment a little bit, at least to say that you guys and the work that you've done over the years have helped create and promote this barbecue culture in Canada, Western Canada, but really Canada more broadly. And if not for you and a handful of other people, we wouldn't be where we are today. And we have, you have changed people's taste. You've brought a new awareness of barbecue to the Canadian palate, and in some ways created a style of, I think we're in the early days, but there's truly going to be, in 20 years, probably there'll be somebody who says, oh, that's Canadian style barbecue, which is pretty cool. I think so. Maybe it's something to do with apple butter. I don't know.
It's our mastery of hot dogs.
That's true too. Yeah. But I think it is worth marking and celebrating that we have really been in early and helped to create a healthy barbecue culture in Western Canada. And that's not just the contests, but in people's backyards. So pretty cool.
There it is. That is awesome. Well, congratulations, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Indeed.
I really am thrilled. And I God, wow, that is just the coolest thing. You remember the Doughboys?
Oh, I don't know that name.
There was a team called the Doughboys that was a couple of brothers.
Okay.
And one of them tragically died. I think he had a heart attack or something. But these guys, they won the Canadian BBQ Championships that year where we came second. And at the following year, at the PNWBA's annual meeting, where people come down and you have bragging rights and people eat some barbecue and tell stories, they told the story of the Doughboys trying to get to the American Royal. And they bought this, they had a trailer, their barbecue trailer, and their truck broke down about a third of the way in. And they bought a Cadillac from a used car dealer that had a trailer hitch on it. It broke down about 2/3 of the way there. And they told this odyssey of this story of trying to repair their car and ending up being stranded at the end several hundred miles away from Kansas City, and basically cooking all their barbecue stuff that they had for the competition for the people in their campground. Everybody in the whole campground got competition barbecue. There were some real real tales. I
Hilarious.
mean, we had a lot of fun. And there was that dentist who was
Yeah.
he and his wife.
A doc.
Yeah, he and his wife cooked fantastic barbecue. There were a lot of characters. It was really something.
Ron, it's awesome to be able to celebrate that with you.
Well, I'm just thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm flabbergasted and truly honored. And obviously, when COVID finally gets out of our midst and we can, really celebrate this, I want to go down there and maybe I can be like, they can have the kind of like the previous year's inductee sort of shuffled onto the stage for a couple minutes in next year's event or something.
Maybe so. Maybe so. That's awesome.
I'm sure that could be arranged.